Chapter 5, Lesson 3, A Call to Arms. So, as we've been moving closer to the disagreements between the British and the colonists, the Sons of Liberty are definitely causing some revolutions. They are leading toward the American Revolution. And the Boston Tea Party and the Boston Massacre were two events that started sparking some more extreme behaviors. So let's see what's going to happen next between the colonists and the British. Anger toward the British grew. Americans began to consider the possibility of independence. A meeting in Philadelphia. What role did key individuals play in this movement toward independence? In September 1774, 55 delegates gathered in Philadelphia. They had come to set up a political body that would represent Americans and challenge British control. The delegates called this body the Continental Congress. Leaders from 12 of the 13 colonies attended the meeting. Only Georgia did not send a representative. Massachusetts sent fiery Samuel Adams and his lawyer cousin John Adams. New York sent John Jay, another lawyer. Virginia sent George Washington, as well as Richard Henry Lee and Patrick Henry, two outspoken defenders of colonial rights. Patrick Henry wanted the colonies to unite in firm resistance to Britain. He summed up the meaning of the meeting when he addressed the delegates on its second day. So here is a primary source. That means his exact words. The distinctions between Virginians, Pennsylvanians, New Yorkers, and New Englanders are no more. I am not a Virginian, but an American. The delegates vote. The delegates discussed complaints against the British. Then they voted. In a state of grievances, the delegates called for the repeal of 13 acts of Parliament. They believed these laws violated the laws of nature and the principles of the English Constitution and the several charters of the colonies. The delegates also voted to boycott British trade. The colonies would not import or use any British goods, nor would they sell their goods in Great Britain. Continental Congress delegates also decided to endorse the Suffolk Resolves, prepared by the people of Boston and other Suffolk County towns in Massachusetts. These resolutions declared the coercive, which the colonists called the intolerable acts, to be illegal. They called on the county's residents to arm themselves against the British. After delegates endorsed the resolves, other colonies also organized militias, which were groups of citizen soldiers. So they're starting to say the acts imposed by the Britain would not be honored. They were going to boycott trade. And they're starting to organize their own citizens and their own colonists to start becoming soldiers. The colonial militias. American colonists had a long tradition of serving and protecting their communities in militias. Members of a militia were an important part of each town's defense. Militia members trained and had drills with the other citizen soldiers. They practiced using muskets and cannons. Each member was required to provide his own weapon, usually a musket, and ammunition. Later, as tension between Britain and the colonies grew, towns began to gather and store military supplies. Okay, so now we're ready to start the fighting. They are armed and ready. Many colonists believed that as fighting with the British were to break out, it would happen in New England. Militias in Massachusetts held drills, made bullets, and started to stockpile weapons. Some militias were known as Minutemen because they boasted that they would be ready to fight in a minute's notice. In the winter of 1774 to 75, a British officer stationed in Boston noted in his diary, "The people are evidently making every preparation for resistance. They are taking every means to provide themselves with arms." So what does Great Britain do in response? The British also got ready for a fight. King George told Parliament that the New England colonies were in a state of rebellion and that blows must decide who would control America. By April 1775, several thousand British troops were in and around Boston, and more were on the way. British General Thomas Gage had orders to seize the weapons from the Massachusetts militia and arrest the leaders. Gage learned that the militia stored arms and ammunition at Concord, which was a town about 20 miles northwest of Boston. So he ordered 700 troops under Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith to Concord, where you will resize and destroy all the artillery and ammunition you can find. They're going after their weapons. On the night of April 18, 1775, colonial protest leader Dr. Joseph Warren walked through Boston. Watching for any unusual activity by the British, he saw troops marching out of the city. Warren alerted Paul Revere and William Dawes, members of the Sons of Liberty. Revere and Dawes rode to Lexington, a town east of Concord, and they spread the word that the British were coming. Revere galloped across the countryside, shouting his warning of the approaching troops. Hearing the news, Samuel Adams said, "What a glorious morning this is." He was ready to fight. A British patrol later captured Dawes and Revere. Another rider named Samuel Prescott carried the warning to Concord. So they rode off and told about the plans of the British. Meanwhile, the British continued their march. At dawn, the Redcoats approached Lexington. There they ran into 70 waiting Minutemen. Led by Captain John Parker, the Minutemen stood on the town common with muskets in hand. Badly outnumbered, the Minutemen were about to give way to the Redcoats. Just then, a shot was fired. From where, it's still not clear. Both sides let loose an exchange of bullets. When the shooting ended, 8 Minutemen lay dead. The British continued on to Concord. While some troops burned the few weapons they found, the others met a group of Minutemen waiting at the North Bridge. In a short battle, the British took heavy losses. They began to make their way back to Boston. Along the road, colonists hid behind trees and fired on soldiers. By the time the Redcoats reached Boston, 174 were wounded and 73 were dead. About 60 years later, poet Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote in the Concord Hymn that the Americans at Lexington and Concord had fired the shot heard round the world. The battle for independence had begun. Okay, so the first shot has gone. More military action about to begin. After the battles at Lexington and Concord, armed conflict with the British forces spread quickly. Benedict Arnold, a captain in the Connecticut militia, raised a force of 400 to seize Fort Capitana near Lake Champlain in New York. Ticonderoga occupied a key location. It was rich in military supplies. Arnold learned that Ethan Allen of nearby Vermont also planned to attack the fort. So Arnold joined forces with Allen's men, the so-called Green Mountain Boys. Together, they took the British by surprise. Fort Ticonderoga, I'm going to have to pronounce that better, surrendered on May 10th, 1775. Later, Arnold became a traitor to the Patriot cause. He sold military information to the British. Benedict Arnold. When his crime was discovered in September 1780, he fled to the British-controlled city of New York City. There, he commanded British troops and led raids against the Americans in Virginia and Connecticut. The Battle of Bunker Hill. Following Lexington and Concord, more volunteers joined the colonial militias. Soon, militia around Boston numbered about 20,000 men strong. The British remained in control of the city with the militia camped nearby. On June 16, 1775, militia commanded by Colonel William Prescott set up posts on Bunker Hill and Breed's Hill across the harbor from Boston. The next day, the Redcoats assembled at Breed's Hill. Bayonets were drawn. They charged. Low on ammunition, Prescott reportedly ordered, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes," meaning wait till they're really close. The Americans opened fire, forcing the British to retreat. Twice more, the Redcoats charged, receiving furious fire from above. Finally, the Americans ran out of gunpowder and had to withdraw. The battle on Breed's Hill, which became known as the Battle of Bunker Hill, was a British victory. Yet the British suffered heavy losses. More than 1,000 were dead and wounded. They were learning that defeating the Americans on the battlefield would not be quick or easy. As news spread about the battles, the colonists each faced a major decision: Should we join the rebels or remain loyal to Great Britain?